Muy bien, entonces esta es la tercera sesión dedicada a la salud y las ciudades. Yo le agradezco mucho a nuestro invitado. Welcome, Vikram. We are very happy to have you here. And adelante, Fernanda, y muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, good evening to Vikram. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and be part of this session. We are in the session of urban transitions around health and cities. And it's an honor because I really appreciate to present Vikramditya Kumar Choudhury, a friend and colleague. I will make a brief presentation about what he has worked on. He is now assistant professor at the Center for the Study of Regional Development, School of Social Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. And his current interest includes urban health, urban culture, spatial transformation, cultural claims, water and sanitation in cities, issues of ethics and role of pharmaceuticals in tuberculosis therapeutics. He's also awarded with Emerging Scholar Award by the Regional Development and Planning Special Group. And it's really an honor to have you here at our university. And let us have this talk with you. I will be taking the questions in the chat room if some of our students have questions there. So the floor is yours, dear Vikram. Please, welcome.
Good. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Before I begin formally, let me say thanks to Fernanda who put me in touch with a great gentleman, Solomon. Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, Fernanda. Good morning to all the colleagues and the students. My apologies in advance for not being able to speak in the language that you understand. However, I have told Solomon that next time, means the next batch, if I get the chance to still talk, I will try to talk in Spanish. So this brief apology, I would share the screen of the PowerPoint presentation, and then we will talk as we proceed. Any one of you, if in between have a pressing question, please, you can write in the chat box in the language that you are comfortable, and I'm sure Nadia or Fernanda will communicate to me in English. I hope the slides are visible because I can see. Okay, great. The idea is to talk about the importance of continuous transformation in our habitat pattern, which is shifting from rural to broadly urban, because larger proportion of people are now living in urban areas compared to any previous time. And that has posed challenges in terms of space, in terms of employment, in terms of economy. But I will not be dealing with these, and I would only concentrate on the changes or the challenges that it has brought in health, how to deal with people. So this is the brief outline. I would deal with need to study urban health. Then I will just in brief, we'll talk about the nature and process of urbanization. And then we'll come to health issues. And finally, I will talk about the specific challenges then which the countries of Global South face. I would try to bring examples from Global South rather than Global North. So that's what the outcome is. The question if we raise, why urban health? Why should a student of urban studies, whether urban sociology or whether urban geography or urban studies itself, should study urban health? And the importance comes with the nature that World Health Organization a decade ago put to urban health by saying 1,000 cities, 1,000 lives. So the slogan which you will find on any of the WHO report after 2010 tries to talk in terms of the divide between rural and urban in terms of the living conditions and outcome of health. But what I would say here is that there is a shift. If a person or a society or a community move from rural to urban area, there are three types of specific change that we see. There is change in terms of production, there is change in terms of consumption, and also the social organization or the way individuals interact amongst themselves or interact to institutions. These are the important aspects that we see. There was a time just around 2008 when the last UN Habitat report comes. Before 18, Global South had single-digit cities with million+ population. But today, there are 300 million cities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So the larger stage is now in the Global South, where the large cities are coming up. And if you focus specifically, they are coming up in larger economies, including that. Definitely I will begin with, say, Mexico, India, South Africa, China. These are the Korea. These are the countries which are having larger cities. So once we have larger cities, there is concentration of resources and people, owing to more opportunity that we have. However, as a collateral or tangentially, what we also see, there are concentration of hazards and accidents also. It could be in terms of climatic hazard, it could be industrial hazard, like that just happened in one of the Middle East countries a few weeks ago, where the entire port area got burned down with more than 1,000 people dead, and definitely the millions of dollar economy ruined. It can happen to any city on any day. The question is, how do we deal? I will deal that at the end of the presentation when I will talk about resilience in terms of health. The broader issues that why cities impact health, or what I call is also the city as a determinant to health. Is it unique that cities create certain type of ailments, or it is uniform across rural areas and urban areas? Four basic issues that I try to draw your attention to make my case that why urban health is required. One, I say consequences of affluence. One of the idea that I have been pursuing for years is that new disease that world is facing is what we call is affluenza, not the influenza that is a fever-based disease. It's a disease which is because of affluence that some people have and many are deprived of. So that's a one disease. If I elaborate, you can think of diseases like all the lifestyle diseases that comes. including in terms of when you have the overconsumption. So from diabetes to the people who are more on chairs and the different kind of stress that urban life adds. Stress is not only to the people who are deprived, but also to people who are having more than required. The second set of challenges which urbanization poses to humanity is consequences of affluence. I'm sure all of you know it, and since school times we know whatever discharge that urban processes release. It could be industrial discharge, it could be domestic waste, it could be all forms of discharges which go to water body and soil, which we consume. Like cancer is one common ailment which has come aggressively in last 20 years. If you are interested, you can read a book by one of the doctors in India who has written the book titled Melodies of Disease. It looks like very interesting because here the cancer is the protagonist. So the book is written as if cancer is talking, and that he says the melody of disease. So the cancer is a supreme disease the world is facing. And one of the reasons is excess affluence present in our food chain, owing to urbanization also, but not said ignoring the fact that it comes through agriculture and plantation. The third, I would say, the consequence of emission, which one of the paper that I have given to you want to read is about the climate change. We all are aware of the emission of different gases, which not only add to pollution level in the cities, but also affect what we call the heat budget of the earth, where more greenhouse gases are trapped and the temperature of the planet is bound to rise. So this is another thing. The fourth, which is more vivid, because the first three, many of you might have decided to ignore for the reason the mainstream literature or mainstream media does not ask us to look at. But the fourth one is vivid. None of us can ignore it. That is consequences of migration. We all know more and more people move from one location to another, from rural areas to urban areas, from small towns to large cities. And I'm sure in Mexico also, because for longer time, Mexico City was the largest city in the world. Now we have taken over. The Bombay is now have become the largest, but there was for a long time Mexico City has been the largest city. So I'm sure you know the people from different parts of the country, from the mountains of Guadalajara to other parts, come to Mexico City as look for the economic opportunity. That is the another region. And once the people come, they do not immediately get to the housing society. So they live in slums, they live on the footpath or what we call homeless, and they also have to contribute to the urban health. I will play a video for 2.5 minutes. This is a video you can later on watch full. It will tell you about migration. Nadia, please do not bother because the wordings are in Hindi, but there is subtitle in English. But let the students just feel the video for 2 minutes and then I will elaborate what it actually means. I'm sure all of us have the sound, so you will be able to view.
Dear Vikram, we cannot see it. Vikram? Bikram, can you stop it a little bit? I think you have to put it, to share it with your, in your screen.
And here?
No, we cannot see it. We can hear, but we cannot see it. So please, with your share screen, select the video,
Okay.
please.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Let me check why it is not doing, because here it is showing that.
Yeah, but we cannot see it.
Okay. Let me just check.
It's not visible.
Yeah, now it will be.
Thank you. Perfect.
Can you now?
Yeah, perfect now.
You can see, right?
Yes.
दो बिगहा में घर बा लेकिन सुतल बानी टेम्पू में जिंदगी अजराइल बाटे नून तेला शैम्पू में मनवा हरियर लागे भैया हाथ लगोते माटी में जेरा अजो अटकल बाटे घर में चोखा बाटी में काबा वाह जिंदगी हम तो जियल चाही खेत बगीचा बारी में छोड़ छाड़ सब आइल बानी हम यहाँ लाचारी में कहाँ में काबा के हमसे कोटी वाला डबल ड्यूटिया खाटा तानी घिबरी के बाती के जैसे रोज रोज हम घाटा तानी इतना शौक बाटे मच्छर से कटवावे के चाहेला ये तेरे अपने के नरभसावे के काबा युवा काबा और शहर के बिचवा में हम गजबे तनखुशी आइल बानी तू चून के रोटी खातिर बॉम्बे में हम आइल बानी ना तो बम्बई में काबा काबा ना तो बम्बई में काबा हेलो सुनाता मैं कहाँ बाड़ू ना होली में होते हैं ठीक बा क्यों दूध आम बाथा मिलल हमरा गाँव में लेकिन यहाँ काम चलत बा खाली भजिया पावे में कोई बका काम काज ना गाँव में बाटे मिलत नहीं नौकरिया हो देखो कैसे हाकत बाड़े जैसे भेड़ बकरिया हो बम्बई में काबा बम्बई में काबा
Okay. This, what I tried to show you, is a kind of migration and the way people are treated in the urban areas, those who are coming from the rural area. This is a kind of indication, and which I will come back to it when I will talk about the recent pandemic, which has changed the entire urban setup, beginning from the employment to healthcare system. But that will come in a little while. So that's one way that migration, how it does. But let me tell you, this also means the three kind of epidemiological transitions that we have faced or that determined the global health, specifically the urban health. The first I call is a epidemiological transition, demographic transition, and nutritional transition. Because the moment people move, there is a shift in the way people live, and there's a epidemiological transition theory by a gentleman called Omer, which talks in terms of the changing pattern of disease. I will again discuss in a later phase that how from communicable diseases to non-communicable diseases, the disease pattern has shifted. Also, if you look at what makes a larger number of addition to people is in terms of demographic transition, so that the change in the birth rate and death rate, which allows more people to live in urban areas. And the third, equally important, is a nutritional transition. We consume different kind of cereals, pulses, protein sources, roughage. But now if we look at, there is a larger shift in terms of added sugar, saturated fat, including the food supplements and so on and so forth, which has created a shift in the disease pattern in the urban areas. And that's the reason that we have to deal with urban health. These are common across the world. Across the world, in every part that we will find this common, which one has to understand if we have to deal with the health. But specifically to the cities of the global south, 4 issues I would like to highlight here. The first, which is issues of access. And I'm saying access in terms of water, because that's a sustenance for every one of us. If I go to the larger rhetorical aspect, our body also have 80% of water. So that's essential. And everyone who has ever studied the settlement pattern, we know that any settlement can come only where there is a source of water. If you have seen the older cities of Mexico, we go away from outside the city, we know the source of water, and that's why the city was situated there where you have the sun temple and moon temple. Adjacent, there is a source of water. Any historical or contemporary city, but currently, the cities of global south face issue of access to water. 50% of population do not have access to water. I have shared with you a reading on WAS, which tells you that 160 million urban population does not have access to clean drinking water, which is a question that one all has to look for. 61% of the population do not have access to safe sanitation. It's a huge number if you see in the global south, where the cities are as big as 20 million, out of which if 60% does not have access to safe sanitation, you can expect the level of challenges that these cities face. Sewage. I will show some of the photographs in a while so that you can have some understanding that what you have. The second issue, which I say, is the issue of contamination. And why it becomes important? For the following reason. The population which doesn't have access to municipal water fall back to groundwater. So they try to extract groundwater for their consumption. And if the groundwater or the water in the ponds, lakes, rivers are contaminated, this set of population is compelled to consume contaminated water, which add to health challenges. Again, if you have read the paper, which is written by Sasikala Saroj, Srinivas Goli, Joel Rana and myself, we have discussed that how cholera is one of the largest challenge for urban south. And this is a waterborne disease, and one of our reason is presence of fecal matter in the drinking water. So I will not repeat that because I have already shared the readings with you and you all can read. But another disease like hepatitis B, jaundice, pneumonia, they also have a relationship with the water. Third important aspect that global south face is issue of adulteration, including that of the food and food item, vegetables and fruit. For a reason that I have just discussed, that affluence which is flown to the water bodies goes back into the food chain through fruits and vegetables. More you eat raw, more threat it is to your life. The nutritions suggest us eat raw vegetable and fruit. However, that also means that we are consuming higher level of toxicity. That is the another challenge that we face. And the fourth, which is again unique to the global south, is outbreak of virus, bacteria, or vector-borne communicable diseases. In addition to the lifestyle diseases, which WHO tells global burden of disease, or a health literatures talk in terms of dual burden of disease, which the third world countries are facing. I have again shared a paper with you, which was published in Lancet, and the Lancet paper discuss the dual burden of disease. All of you who want to read more on that can access other papers, especially in Lancet, because they talk more based on data. I'm keeping it outside data because it will be far more complex for a shorter time. Question is why such a situation prevail? And I have taken 2-3 quotations. One is determinant of health and disease exist outside the medical competence. That means it's a social life or a political and economic life which is important for the existing health issues. We also know the life expectancy is shorter and most diseases are common when we move to the lower quintile of population. Like the poorer section of society will have lower life expectancy and higher burden of disease. So the question of access, what I just discussed, added with the higher burden of disease, made the situation more precarious for poorer section living in the slums and informal settlements of the cities of global south. So along with this, the economic stress, like in this pandemic, I did not lose the job, but millions in my own country lost the job who were working in the informal sector or in the private multiple service operations, starting from transport, tourism, industry, services, commerce. They all lost the job owing to the lockdown or the withdrawal of transport system. So who are more vulnerable? The question of vulnerability comes. But this vulnerability adds to stress. And that also means there is a higher burden of mental illness on the poorer section of population. So that's so that people become anxious and they become unable to cope because they do not have access to healthcare system. Coming to the next, which I would like to bring to, is this is the one thing, how do we know it? And there are different sets of data. Let me also tell you all that absence of data to tell us about the actual number of people losing job, actual number of people facing stress, actual number of people dealing with the hardship, there is no data available on that from different countries. That means we are so complacent and ignorant at the same time. The authorities are complacent that nobody is going to bother about it, but people are vulnerable because academicians do not have numbers to deal with and tell you the truth. So we depend on multiple sources of data. Estimation, private sources of data, data from the non-governmental organization or charitable organization, data from stories of people, the videos, the films, like one video I showed you that tells us the story of. So what I'm basically trying to tell you, we move away from the conventional notion of data that we will have government reports, census data, WHO report. We have to move beyond that and we have to look for audio, videos, visual data, individual videos put up by people on air, because in the current scenario, these also will add to our data pool. Even the paintings could be data, because the kind of graffiti people draw when they are in stress, that also can be taken to understand urban health. So that's why I have left it open that people can choose whatever kind of information that we have as a source. Now the question is, how do we deal with it? There are two levels that we deal. One is institutional structure and the second is individual initiative. So institutional structure is access to healthcare. That means availability of healthcare. We know during this pandemic, large number of countries did not have enough beds or ventilators or oxygen supply system. But let me tell you, friends, it is not only during pandemics. During huge one time also, thousands die in the want of medical care. From the basic ailment like cholera or diarrhea to fatal road accidents, because that also is part of urban health. The injuries which are there because of the kind of chaotic traffics that you must have seen on roads in the different videos. I did not bring that, but definitely the video that I showed you will tell you a kind of chaos that you see. So, but then also the second aspect is about how many people or families are outside the insurance net. And three kinds of insurance, all are equally important. Health insurance, life insurance, accidental insurance, because all of them are important. But let me tell you, I'm not a big fan of insurance. When I teach my health course, I tell insurance is primarily a fraud. A fraud, it's a chosen word, I'm not using it loosely, because insurance is always in the return of premium. And what we say is a collective risk, an individual threat. So all of us are at risk of falling sick or meeting an accident, so we buy insurance. But there are not that all claim. There is a limited number who claim. So who pay premium? Who are unable to pay for their water. If they pay premium for the insurance, I would be rather arguing for later I will come universal health care system. But in some countries, there is a state paid insurance, like in Australia. The Australian healthcare system, which is a universal healthcare system, linked to insurance. Because if it is not in universal healthcare, the insurance company either delay for the payment or overcharge, because they know that insurance companies are paying. So individuals suffer. But what we do at an individual initiative? Lifestyle. So lot of these days things come like healthy lifestyle. So I'm not getting into that. Food intake, definitely again the nutritional aspect of it, and definitely health promotion, like regular checkup or screening, what we say, screening for disease, certain diseases, specifically say like cancer, or immunization. So you take in, say vaccines, but then a state, it is the institutional structure. If it is an individual is responsible for immunization, or state is responsible for universal immunization programs. That's another important aspect. That make us move to what we call is a governance structure. And here we talk in terms of health policy, which I told you, like the universal health coverage. If we do not have that, then a term which we use in health studies, what we call out-of-pocket expenditure. It is just a technical term which refers to the money that an individual has to pay if he or she falls sick and take treatment. So how much money you pay on everything together, on transport, for reaching to the doctor, on the consultancy charges, buying medicine, hospitalization, post-care, all of this taken together is called out-of-pocket expenditure. So in case health policy, if we have universal health coverage, that out-of-pocket expenditure would be lower because you only pay on transportation. Rest is taken care of. But then in the third world country, there is also what we call such cases are dealt through social network or social capital. I'm not going to the concept of social capital or Bourdieu or social network, or community-based health service, like the churches run hospitals, or the temples and the trusts, they run hospitals. So that also can take care of the condition that we have. Let me come to the key issues which I want to focus today. So one is water, another is air. I will focus on water. So three types of water that we actually need. One is for drinking purpose. Only 3% of population use bottled water. Rest are dependent on tap water or water purified after collecting from tap. Then discharge of wastewater. Discharge of wastewater is equally important as much as the drinking water and domestic water, because the discharge goes back to the system. These are some of the actual photographs. I'm sure Fernanda will vouch for it that she has seen. So I'm not giving you photographs from anywhere. These are from my own research that we are doing. The first photograph that you see on the screen, there are people, and you can see one specific observation is larger number of women for collecting water from the water tanker. So that's how it works. But please look at the building structure. They are all not very poor. They are normal people, because you see 2-3 story of houses, a car parked. But even in that locality, water supply is irregular or not there, and people are there collecting water. The second one, you can see a member of a family, again a woman, trying to fill these vessels for water. Please look at the top of this photograph. You will see a water storage tank, but water doesn't come. So it never goes to tank, and people are dependent on what you see at the bottom. The third photograph is a very, very funny photograph, but again a truth. It's accumulated rainwater in the city NCR, what we call National Capital Region. You can see the car parked everywhere, but then, so at one side you have no water to drink, but on the other you have water access not going out of the system and remain stagnant in the city. Stagnant water definitely brings, it's a disease breeding ground in terms of mosquitoes and fly based diseases and other diseases which are the waterborne diseases. So that's the one of the thing that you see. This, I'll now come to the bit of historical theorization that how water is studied. This is gentleman John Snow, first ever who has studied health in a city based on. There is a map of London. You can identify with the bottom, there is a place called Piccadilly. I'm sure all of you know that. With that, you know there is it's London. And then Oxford Street, Broad Street is my major point that I want you to see. This is Broad Street, if you see. And there is a black square. It's the location of the pump. So what you see, this was the type of pump that it used to have. So here is a pump. There was an infamous cholera outbreak in London. Cholera usually is considered a tropical disease. When it was in the, please also remember, 1854, it was a time of British Empire, the greatest, mightiest, and most expansive empire in 1854, and then their capital got a cholera outbreak. How to deal with it? So this gentleman, John Snow, mapped the episodes of disease. All the dots that you see in this map are household infected with cholera. And what you see, there is a larger concentration here, here, and as you move away, there are sparse distribution. This was the one of the indication that he did further studies, and what he come up, these are now the houses which are affected. And what he realized, that people who were using water from the pump at the Broad Street got infected. This gave us beginning of what we know now today as a full discipline called urban health. So how water supply system in a city can be responsible for a communicable disease. That's what it happened. These are the further detail of that. So finally what he did, so it was a sewer line, and the sewer line was damaged, and because the sewer line was damaged, the water supply line and sewer line got connected, fecal matter flowed to the water, and cholera outbreak took place. The second key area is sanitation. Because connected to water, they are not separate aspects. But third world countries, major challenges are in terms of water and sanitation. So this is again the pictures that I'm sharing you from Delhi NCR, and you can see the condition of sewage all across that it's on your screen. You see this is an open manhole, then all that uncovered or a partly covered broken system, which are breeding ground of mosquitoes, and then disease like malaria, chikungunya, dengue. These are the basic that you will see. Further, if you see here, this is a garbage collection of condition of the garbage collection. Along the railway track, you see all spread. Again, the open, it comes to from the household, it comes to main drain, but then it remains uncovered. So, and in the rainy season, it overflows, and then water can actually go to even the houses that people live there. This is a photograph that I have shared with you earlier on the right hand side, this photograph, but this is an interesting photograph. See, India geographically, East India is an area where you have more rainfall. So you have cities earlier had ponds and natural water bodies which used to accumulate water. If you see this photograph on your left side, you will see the land filling being done. So the fresh sand is being put inside the water bodies to reclaim it and construct the house. This is a very, very interesting photograph. I try to find out to connect it with your own city. I'm sure you, all of you know the Mexico City, the place where is it located, the history of Mexico City. When the Spanish tried to create a city, it is on a landfill, on a large water body. And that's why one of the earthquake that it happened in your Central Avenue, the whole church was just, it has gone underground and it remains only a part of it that you can see today near your parliament building. Because initially I thought that why is that? So what I'm saying, that if the water bodies are filled and the houses are constructed, the second situation will become the reality. Because there is no place for water to flow back to the natural system. And that creates a kind condition for further disease. I come to this now. What are the nature of disease that I talked in the beginning? The three sets of diseases, and there is an epidemiological transition. So three sets of diseases: communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and injuries. So first set, like malaria.
Let me just say that you have some more minutes just to be aware of time.
Sure. Yep. Fine. Thanks. So communicable, non-communicable, and injuries. If you look at this map, which is the global burden of disease, what we see, the share of non-communicable diseases continuously increasing. But then share of communicable diseases decreasing, because the developed world have controlled communicable diseases to some extent. But the countries of global south are still here. So if you see the previous slide, they remain like here. So you face both communicable as well as non-communicable diseases. This is again a global trend. If you see on the major 6 regions and how there is a shift in terms of diseases, and what's the prediction for next years, that you will see. That's basically the data. I don't want to walk down with data. So I've come to the case of India, which is a primary survey based on 200,000 population of a patient. And what we see, 35% went to doctor for fever. And the reason was primarily what we say, tuberculosis or other respiratory disease. The second most common is disease of circulatory system. Third comes to hypertension, 14%. Large number of hypertension disease in our Indian cities. And then anemia and diabetes. These two contribute. Now let's come to the last slide, because I know that Fernanda has already said, to the COVID and the resilience, how the cities make. See this COVID-19, as we say it internationally, 3 major challenges have come back to us. Renewed interest in urban sustainability. Everybody now talks about urban sustainability, especially because there is a disease and how to deal with. Urban health, because I have tried to do some work on the papers published on COVID, and almost 50% paper specifically talk on urban health. Combined to urban resilience and urban health, it would be something around 60%. But my question is it possible? That's a question for all of you. Because resilience has to be proactive. It cannot be reactive. So if the cities are planned in such a way that it can take a jolt, then only it can respond, or what we can call is a resilient city or urban resilience. It cannot react. So nature of disease, if you see, and especially in pandemic, there was prejudice, victim blaming. We try to find victim on basis of religion, cleanliness, here and there, and worst is stigma. So urban health is primarily the three things that I am writing would conclude for any disease, including that of COVID. Urban health is also compromised because we have certain prejudice against communities, like slum dwellers. We take it for granted the slum dwellers will suffer from malaria and dengue. So we blame the victim rather than improving sanitation and sewage system in the slum area. And then definitely stigma. So if you find a poor person in the hospital, everybody would like to have a distance because the person is suffering from a disease which is communicable disease. And that goes to global level, especially when you grant visa. You check for disease A, B, C. If you are suffering from tuberculosis, you will not get visa to certain countries. But I'm not getting into that part, spread of disease. So I will, this is the last that I wanted to share. Now I will actually, is a link which I will paste in the chat box and will then ask all of you to vote. Question you will see there are two questions. One, multiple choice type, and the second one where you can write one word or two words. Please reply to this. I will get the result. You also can see the result. Thank you so much.
Dhanjaba, thank you very much, Bikramji. We have homework now. Thank you for that. Well, this was like a very important presentation on urban health issues and challenges. I'm sure that one session is not enough to discuss all the issues you put on the table. The subject is so relevant today. It is until a few months ago that we have acknowledged its importance. As you said, we need more data, more studies, more approaches. Thank you for guiding us on how we can begin to think about all these important issues. And also, it's very interesting to know how health has been studied historically. No? So for our students, probably many of them can start with getting into these historical approaches. And also, I really appreciate that you gave some glimpses of gender perspective on the subject. So I don't want to take more time. I really would like to say thank you very much. It's very nice to have you here in our university, and the privilege that our students can hear you, can learn from you. So I will open the questions to our audience, to our students. If anyone has a question, you can put it in the chat room, and I will read it for our speaker. And you can write it in English or in Spanish, doesn't matter. We have the, I can translate it, or Nadia can do it also. So Omar Pérez Estrada está escribiendo para nosotros una pregunta: ¿cómo influye el nivel académico y socioeconómico en la propagación de una enfermedad en la ciudad? Entonces, I will leave Nadia. You want to translate it for Bikram? Bikram, you can change probably your, behind. You have this interpretation like the world. You can change there so you can hear Nadia's translation. Yep. So I will read it again. ¿Cómo influye el nivel académico y socioeconómico en la propagación de una enfermedad en la ciudad? No, if not, if you cannot hear Nadia, I can translate it. How you see that there is an influence, in academic level and socioeconomical level in propagating diseases in the city. I'm not Nadia, but I think, I hope you understood.
See, it's a question that is primarily, I'm sure, coming from somebody who want to do future research in the area of health. And as far as the academics is concerned, we are still, I would say, it's a kind of a little ahead of infant. So at kind of an adolescent stage in terms of research in urban health, especially if we take the examples of the global south. However, the issues in terms of the need and the requirement of having it currently is serious for a region that I told you that 61% of population in global south is not having access to sanitation. And if I've read the paper that I have shared on WAS, that is water, sanitation, hygiene, we have showed that how larger number of children are getting infected from simple diseases like diarrhea or pneumonia, which is curable, but we still lose lives. So if we have to save lives and we want to create a healthy city, like that what SDG 11 talks about, then probably we need more emphasis, not only on research, but also on data collection. So we need to have the official statistics to work further. So your question is, when you look in terms of that, once the state starts collecting data on health, we will know how important it is becoming for different states.
Okay, thank you, Bikramji. I have another question. I have to say to our students that we are going to read first in the chat room. We will attend all these questions in the chat room. And then I see that Pablo Pana Santos is raising his hand. So I will ask him for to wait a little bit so we can answer some of these questions that are coming in the chat room. So the next question is Diego Cervantes is asking Bikramji how to prevent health studies in the urban context from taking up deterministic discourses. For example, tropical cities are more prone to infectious disease, something like that.
Say health determinism is one of the serious challenge, but now if you see the health literature, that determinism is challenged. And I would tell you with my own experience of working in the field of health that earlier, as you said, like cholera was considered as tropical disease, or even today, tuberculosis is considered as disease of poor. And we blame different countries, like United States blame Asian countries, like India, one of the key countries to bring tuberculosis to United States. However, the papers which was written, even in American Journal of Public Health in 2008, 2012, and 2018, challenged this notion and showed the genetic progression of resurgence of tuberculosis in American population. It was not external sources. You compare it with something like what happened with COVID. Every part of the world blamed someone else, including Mexico. I read the initial news. Mexico blamed the United States for COVID. India blamed the Tablighi Jamaat, the Muslim community, for tuberculosis. Europe blamed Italy for tuberculosis, Rome, because it is the major tourist destination. Gentleman Trump blamed China for COVID. Let us understand, friends, if we even believe these narratives, China controlled the disease at a number 85,000. It's the economic desire and greed. We continued trade and travel throughout the world and made the situation as it is. Like if I give you an example from India, today it is something close to 50 million. Rather, So what we did, we closed down the cities and left poor people no choice than to walk back to villages. They walked back to villages with the diseases, and then now the rural areas and smaller areas are also infected. So the problem with the determinism age and how we challenge it, more studies, we have to challenge the stereotypes, bring new evidences, and then challenge the determinism. There is no other way, because there would be always a section of academician as well as the power state, which will try to create a narrative about disease. And it is not today. Since the time of Harvey, when the first circulatory theory has come. If I give you another example of tuberculosis, India did not have case of tuberculosis in early 1800 to the scale it is having now. Because now India is the largest contributor of global tuberculosis number. But it came from Europeans. So if we study the history of diseases, whether tuberculosis or plague or cholera, the determinism is challenged. If you want to read, I can suggest some of the health scholars. You can read Mark Harrison. You can read David Arnold. The title of the book of David Arnold is Colonizing the Body, which actually challenged the British notion of constructing disease. A Mark Harrison book is State, Power and Disease. By the title itself, it tells you how it challenged the notion of disease propagated by the state. So you can read any of these, and definitely the recent articles which are actually bringing up evidences and challenging it on regular basis, how to not fall prey to disease determination. I hope it answers. Fernanda?
Yes, dear.
You can tell me if I understood correctly.
No, you understood correctly. An excellent book that you recommend, that of David Arnold's. I really like that book, and I think we have it in our library. So we move on to Salomon's comment and question. As you know, Bikram, the Habitat 2, the UN, this conference of Habitat 2, HBAITA 2, he wrote it like that, agenda, has supported the compact city model with the pandemic, the idea of urban density. This agenda has supported the compact city model. With the pandemic, the idea of urban density has been questioned. What do you think of, and he puts these three things, spatial dimension, morphology of cities, and health? Do you think you understood?
I understand this question. We are actually trying to work on the idea of urban resilience in the post-COVID world. And we are trying to take Bombay as a case study and then see how it has unfolded. Compact city model, which was said in terms of energy saving or less energy city, because if you travel less, you've been definitely, because one of the key component of energy consumption is intra-city commuting. So the compact city in COVID cases, see the situation, it is like how much space an individual family has. Like the largest slum in the world, that is Dharavi in Mumbai. Initially, it has a large number of COVID patients. The patient 0 in Dharavi was a health worker in one of the hospitals. Means sanitary worker in a hospital was a patient 0 who died. It was an old woman who died. But later, they controlled it in terms of larger spread across the Dharavi. So the final number and fatality was controlled. So it would be premature to say that compact city still can provide us an answer. But one thing I would definitely say, based on the experience that we have gathered so far, that if we have a city where basic facilities is provided to everyone, water, sanitation, sewage, and clean air, compact city model would still be better rather than the earlier concept of garden city model where we can expand land. Because land is not a resource which we are going to have in abundance in future. And the more land we take, we always take precious agricultural land. And the reason is our current cities are located in fertile lands. Because when the urban center started, they did not go to barren land. It is a transformation of a rural settlement to urban settlement, especially where the large rural settlement had trade. So they become the large urban settlement. So any expansion of current cities will eat up fertile land. So we cannot afford to do that. So the only option I still think is what we call is a compact city. And in terms of health, we have to look for the alternate way to contain the outbreak of disease at a 0 patient rather than letting it spread all across the country and then finding no answer. So that would be my response to this.
Okay, Bikramji. Now we have Diego Cervantes. It's a very good question. What role does colonialism play in the global inequalities in access to health? For example, taking the example of London during the Great Cholera epidemic, what impact did the health development of the metropolis have on its colonies?
Okay, London cholera I have already explained, but the question is in terms of the colonial rule and spread of disease. There are, I would say, there are mixed experiences. Like if I tell you the first medical college, if I say, was opened in India in way back in 1793. What they call is that point of time London School of Tropical Medicine, and it was opened much before the cholera outbreak of London. But after the cholera outbreak in London, they aggressively promoted research in the colonies for two specific reasons. One, that they wanted to understand tropical diseases so that their officers, if they carry it back to Europe, they can contain it. The second important objective was, if you read that book that I said, Colonizing the Body by David Arnold, was to present the empire as a compassionate character. So it was with an objective that empire is looking after the population in the colony. So that was the dual objective. The third and most important, which remains even today, was to ensure uninterrupted supply of labor to the industries. Because if you lose the skilled people who are working in industries, you have to once again create a pool of labor and training. If you see the Ronald Ross work on malaria in India, the paper Ronald Ross got Nobel, and later the British officers, he was already himself was a medical officer in India, Ronald Ross, and what he wrote, that the empire cannot afford to lose workers in large number due to fever. So we have to understand the colonial impact on health in multiple ways. I would not say the pre-colonial health system was better than the colonial system. That would be definitely not, that would be an unscientific negation. But I would say that when the, what today we know is the English medicine or allopathic medicine, whatever name that we try to put up, we have to understand in context that what was a need and requirement of a colonial empire and how did they intervene in colony. Like they did not do same for Africa. For Africa, they had a different treatment. But for India, they have a different treatment. For a region that Indian labor was taken to Britain. After retirement, the officers took laborers to Britain, which now is a big number in UK. So we have to understand it in a context that how colonial empire has responded to it. But the three basic, I would say, how they have responded.
Yes, very good question. Well, now Darinka Orozco is asking about what can we do or which measures can we think about in terms of mental health and violence issues with the pandemic, stress, anxiety, and cases of violence increased. So what do you think it's there that we have to do?
Yeah, that's a serious challenge, and especially countries like India where mental health is still remain stigma. I'm not an expert on mental health because I have basically worked on communicable diseases. But as much as I am interacting and I'm trying to be a kind of support to even the students because they are under worst stress ever, especially the research students. So the question is, I'm not sure about Mexico. Sometime I will speak to some of you or maybe through literature that what is a condition of stigma that is attached to mental health. But for India, I can definitely tell you the one or for anywhere. The first is to challenge the stigma that is around medical health, mental health. And then the second is reaching out. Like even in Indian state, even in this condition, they have opened up what we call is a helpline to anyone who feels stressed. They can reach out to 24/7 and there are counselors who can talk to the person in stress. So that could be the one option. As far as the violence coming because of stress, let me tell you that indicate the character of a society. Because the violence is a character of society, and if you say that there is an imbalanced gender violence, definitely there is an inherent patriarchy there. Because if you, the kind of domination that you are having in a society, the pattern of violence would be reflection of that, even in stress. It would hardly be the reverse. Yes, the reverse, there could be crime. But then it would be not be appropriate to really say something with 100% confidence because I have not worked on mental health. So I would not be giving you a clear answer. My only answer would be that there should be a venue through whichever system, through church, through a state, through civil society, of a helpline where people in stress can reach out and communicate. Because through communication, mental stress can be managed. That much I can say with certainty.
Thank you, Bikramji. Now, Octavio is asking, when you talk about the relationship between migration and communicable disease, that's the concept. Do you think that in terms of interurban migration is the same relationship and intensity?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that is because we did a work in Delhi on dengue. And what we got the finding is something really an eye-opener. We mapped it with the system and the data. So what it happens that dengue is usually considered a disease of vector-borne disease and the bacteria that grows in clean water and through mosquito then transmitted to the host. So if one person is dengue positive and works in a 20-story completely what we call sanitized office space of MNC office, once the person walked from the slum to the MNC office, even the cleaning staff, the dengue virus already reached that building. Mosquitoes once there, and let me tell you, dengue mosquitoes bite during daytime. So then it is in the high economic group. So from slum to high economic group, it only need one person. And after that, it's like any disease, it doesn't look boundary in terms of, so what do you see? Scale is different. Like when, and also the time scale is different. I'm talking of both the scale, a scale in terms of time and a scale in terms of space. So dengue or malaria, intra-city movement or commuting can be confined to that particular city. But like plague, which started in Egypt, reached Europe, from Europe it traveled back to China, from China through India it went back to Russia. So if you see the map of the, say, diffusion of disease at an international level, it would look different. You can do it for COVID. There are maps available. You can have a look at it, that how patient zero from Singapore reached to French Alps, and then French Alps, it goes everywhere in the Europe. But then intra-city commuting is also, I would say, have a similar impact in the spread of disease. Only the scale varies, but process remains the same.
Okay. So Tonatiuh is asking, if we think of the city as a social ecological system, we see that high levels of connectivity can favor the spread of disease. Then in what way can we understand or think of connectivity as a positive to as good or positive to avoid disease?
That could be in terms of, I would say, you a brilliant example, like the doctors from Cuba comes to Europe and treat patient. So your healthcare can reach faster. In case of eventuality of, say, natural disaster, immediately the rescue team reach, or in case of crash, in case of, because see, please understand, when I talk of health, injuries are part of health. So any disaster, the healthcare system that reaches on a spot is also because of faster communication. So it's always, you have to look it for the context.
Okay, so Joanna Paez, one of my students, is asking, what do you see that it can be done in terms of sexual and reproductive education in children and adolescents to avoid increase in sexual transmitted disease and unwanted pregnancies or child pregnancies in the most vulnerable areas of the cities?
Your question also has answered, because you first answered and then you ask the question. The moment you say that education in terms of reproductive and sexual education, that would be the answer for most vulnerable to remain protective against it. The alternate also would be easy access to the healthcare system without attaching a stigma either to unwanted pregnancy or to STD. Because in many societies, sexually transmitted diseases are looked at with stigma. So one is education, but the second is a larger question where state and society in combination has to ensure that stigma is not attached to the diseased person.
Thank you. Amy Lara is asking, how can we incorporate the spatial dimension into urban sustainability approaches without falling into the prejudice on poverty, on sustainability, given the multiple correlations in this regard?
See, that's you cannot have, if you are saying prejudice that poverty gives rise to disease, I would not say that you can ever be not keep this prejudice. It is not a prejudice, but it is rather taking a position. See, as a academician, we cannot not take position. We know that poverty, there is what we call is a vicious cycle of reproduction of disease. So undernourished mother will give birth to a child who is malnourished or vulnerable to different diseases. If the child is not taken care of, the child will be vulnerable to multiple communicable diseases. Further, economic challenges adds stress, and the person becomes more vulnerable or becomes a dual burden of disease. So we cannot not take into account that poverty is one of the reasons for having such diseases. However, if you say that question of a scale, that how question of a scale can be taken up within the city while addressing, I would say that location of healthcare infrastructure is the first thing that has to be, I would say, reassessed. Because if we look at the location of hospitals or dispensary or a lower level, say, healthcare units, we have to see where there is more occurrence of disease. Because you need hospital and easy access to this section of population. I can give you example from India, which is not very happy situation, but India is recently boasting. You can see reports, unfortunately it doesn't come in Spanish, but you can bother Fernanda, or now Google Translation can do that for you. News reports can definitely be translated in Spanish from English. India is boasting on higher technological advancement in tertiary health in terms of, say, transplant. So kidney transplant, liver transplant, knee transplant, even brain transplant, they say that we can do. And they are doing it for rich patient in the name of health tourism. Because a sick person, say from the first world, if gets treated in India, the person incur at least maximum 40% of the cost that it come in first world. However, in India, we still have 1,000 deaths per day due to tuberculosis. And this is not my report or an NGO report. This is the government report. So we still are not able to contain a simple disease of tuberculosis, which can be contained with better nutrition. So the question comes here, what should be the priority? The priority in India, if I am a policy maker, I would say the primary health care. But where the focus? The focus is on attracting dollars in the high-end tertiary care. So that's a mismatch. So the question of scale has to be understood in terms of priority, and then identifying the focus area.
Yeah. Okay. Omar Perez Estrada says, in terms of demographic control, decreasing the population, that would help reverse the environmental and health disaster in the cities, and what are the ideal public policies to reduce health problems in the cities?
See, your first part of question, I would say there is no relationship with number and facility. I'm not a believer in terms of the because the problem is because of population. It is not. Let me be categorically say once again, any problem in urban areas, whether in a question of health or transportation or employment, is not because of number. There are other questions which are responsible for it, because there are, I usually used to give anecdote, but I will not give you that anecdote because it is in Indian mythology. I'm not sure that how exposed you are to that. But basically what I'm trying to see is we have to see the consumption pattern, or what I said in first is the affluence. Say Gandhi, I'm sure that all of you know, because I know that with Fernanda, once I was in Mexico, and the first person who came to know that I am from India, the first word the person said was, I know Gandhi. So I'm sure you all know about Gandhi. Gandhi once said that there is enough for everyone's need, but earth does not have enough for one man's greed. I've chosen the word carefully, man. Women doesn't have greed to eat the earth. So it's a question of how do we distribute the resources rather than blanket position taking against the population. Because if people consume less, the world will be a better place. But unfortunately, the economic necessities are such that we always promote more consumption, because lower consumption means lower production, and lower production means slow growth of economy, which in the otherwise you can say economic slowdown. And economic slowdown means tremors across the world. The largest earthquake, most severe earthquake in the world is economic slowdown. Not what you have seen in Mexico City in 80s and not what we see in Himalayas. The worst earthquake is economic slowdown because everything starts trembling. So we have to understand that rather than looking at the demographic, we also sometimes have to incorporate economy and especially the consumption pattern. Yes, I'm not saying that earth doesn't have problem with the number, but I can tell you with larger, other than China, India is the largest number of people. But if you look at the India's consumption of energy, it would not come even in top 100 countries. So if these many numbers cannot consume energy that say the top 50 countries consume, definitely we have to look that where are the answers. So answer lies somewhere else.
Yeah, very good answer, Bikramji. Well, we are out of time now, so I will ask one last question from the chat group, and we will have another one that Pablo Pana Santos will.
He has written in English me, so you have to give him chance.
Okay, yeah, no, of course. So Blanca Ballesteros, this is our last question, says, in the context of a pandemic, what recommendations and adjustments should be made regarding mobility and transportation in cities?
If you are talking of the current pandemic, then WHO comes with everyday guidelines. So wearing mask, maintain hand hygiene, and do not crowd. That's this is not my guideline. This is the WHO guideline. I'm only rereading it. Because that's what I do. But there is no alternative. We do not know the disease yet.
Muy bien. So Pablo, can you open your microphone and ask directly to Bikram? Thank you.
Gracias, profesora. Hello, sir. Thank you for your conference today. It was really, really very interesting. I have first in context regarding what you were exposing about the London outbreak in cholera, and then bringing this to the present day. In the UK, we have health insurance in which covers everything by the government, right? But then we translate this to the colonies, and more specifically, then you spoke about the Australian government, which is the Commonwealth. and the Commonwealth versus the US, for example, when you spoke about Trump. In terms of that, what is the policy to bring the water to the cities? Because that is one of the biggest problems in terms of the good health, right? And how is the government addressing this infrastructure problem in terms of we get the water? And the second question I have would be, because of the awareness of the information and prevention that we can have, is there a direct relation on the caste system? Because in India, you have the Brahmani, I'm not sure I'm saying this right, you have 5 different kinds, the Kasiria, the Vashiria, the Budhiria, and the Barijan, right? So how is the caste system being addressed for the awareness of health, right? Thank you.
You cannot escape that question, Vikramji.
Yeah. Thank you, Pablo, for representing the participants by asking direct question. See your question in the larger global context. Let me say 3 things. So the case of Australia is very unique. Australia had a prime minister in 60s, which was removed from his position. The only prime minister which was removed before completion of the term. He was a prime minister who actually ensured a universal healthcare system in Australia for 4 years. You know that they have the 4-year government. 3.5 years he was removed, because they thought that he will become a kind of a communist leader and he will not leave the office. So they did not allow him to seek second election and he was removed. This I came to know while I was working in the library, that is his private library, on the private papers that he had while leaving the office. What Australia, but I tell you, once Australia implemented the universal health, he only had the draft and got the vote of different states and he rolled out. But the actual implementation was after he left the office. But what happens? Once the people know that it is possible and it is their right, no party could withdraw it. They tried several times to, quote unquote, what we call rationalize the health expenditure. What UK is doing now. Rationalizing the national health scheme. And that's why they are in mess. But Australian population did not allow that to happen. So finally they introduced insurance. So, but because why? That's again a larger question of what we call the interest of the global corporate in converting health from service to commodity. Because health today is a commodity, and the moment it becomes a commodity, it becomes amenable to accrue profit. So that means each one of us are a commodity. Once we fall sick, the healthcare system is no more care system. It's a health system for which we are an opportunity, from which it can generate profit. So the example of United States that you gave is that for them, everything is open for profit generation. So if you have a private, like I gave you example of India, that we have big private hospitals which are generating profit with big high-level technological health advancements and transplants. But the people suffer. So the question is that how we address the issue of health and education, and how much we allow the global corporate to generate profit. I would use another word, which is regulator. If a state is regulating the healthcare, like during COVID, India has to regulate pricing. Otherwise, healthcare was charging exuberant prices. But my only submission would be for everyone to see if during COVID we can regulate price, why not on other times? On the times price should be regulated. Let the private parties make profit, but make reasonable profit. We cannot allow people to make exuberant profit at the cost of people's health. So that's a question of insurance and health term. Insurance, which is a prevailing system in the United States, I have already said about my position on insurance, because I consider insurance as something amenable for what I call is a premium. The people who cannot pay for their basic health definitely cannot pay premium. But the system is such, like in India, state pays premium. My answer to these are, let us have universal healthcare system. No insurance, no premium. Let's have universal healthcare system. The amount, the money that we are spending in maintaining the financial structure of insurance company, and then solvency and insolvency, let's put all the money into the healthcare system and create a universal healthcare system which will take care of everything. But that is a larger will that we need. It is not a question that how will we do. Let us try it, and I'm sure it will be a success. None of us want to go hospital and earn profit. We go to hospital only when one is sick. We can be taxed in different ways. Like our incomes are taxed, our own services are taxed. I'm willing to ensure a system where population is made to pay tax for universal healthcare system. So my answer is a robust universal healthcare system, rather than part state, part private, part insurance, because this is an unholy nexus between the financial companies maintaining their own den. That's my understanding on health that I have studied in different contexts. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you. So that was our last question. I think we don't have anyone else. And well, I just have to say, as Claudia Ortiz wrote it, this was a brilliant presentation, Bikramji. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all your comments, and it was a very a rich conversation with our students. Thank you, Nadia, for the translation. And I just want to say that I really need a chai, those that you prepare, and enjoy it with you and Nilu. Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to say.
We'll go home and we'll have chai.
Yes, please. We need a chai. Yes.
Sí, también quisiera agradecer de la oficina de la UAM en Europa y de este esfuerzo para los posgrados que participan de la UAM. Fue muy enriquecedor tu clase. Los estudios, la formación en urbanismo en México rara vez integra la dimensión de salud de la manera en que se presentó ahora, y sobre todo la parte desde el punto de vista de transición, ponerlo en el contexto de estas tres transiciones de la alimentación, que será el tema de la próxima sesión, de la transición demográfica y la transición epidémica. Entonces, nuevamente, muchas gracias. Thanks a lot, dear Bikram, and again, we hope to see you soon.
Gracias.
Okay, thanks again. Y gracias a todos. Nos vemos. Este video estará puesto en la red en YouTube. Bikram, si quieres decir algo para cerrar.
Do you want to say something just to close the session, dear Bikramji?
I would say gracias to all the participants. Thanks to Salman. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Nadia. I know the MAC is making definitely an important contributions. Thank you, MAC. Thank you, Jody. I know that there was one in the beginning. I did not get the name, but you said Redolf, right? So I would like to thank Redolf because he was also supposed to contribute to the talk. So thank you all for staying, and I'm sorry that I could not take a direct question from all of you because of my inability in the language that you speak. So it's my apology once again for not being able to talk in Spanish. But thank you all and gracias.
One more thing, Bikramji, during your presentation, you reference a book, Malady something. So they were asking for the complete name and the name of the author, please. If you can write it in the chat room for everyone to see it. Namaskar. Thank you very much. Danjaybat.
Gracias a todos. Y bueno, en lo que Bikram escribe la referencia, nos vemos el próximo lunes a las 9 de la mañana, hora de México, con la participación del doctor Gareth Heinsom de la Universidad de Cape Town en Sudáfrica sobre sistemas urbanos alimentarios, tendencias emergentes. Será la misma lógica, será en inglés con el apoyo de traducción, intérprete simultáneo. Entonces, bueno, eso es todo. Y este video estará, como decía, en la plataforma, en el canal de YouTube, en unos dos o tres días más. Bueno, pues gracias y podemos irnos desconectando. Yo no desconecto para dejar grabado en WhatsApp la referencia de Bikram. Gracias.